Ladies and gentlemen, hello there, watching L24 Midnight News Edition, coming to you live from Algiers, and to the headlines. On the second day of his visit to Portugal, the Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune was given an official reception by his Portuguese counterpart, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. And despite the seventh ceasefire agreement between the warring parties, according to witnesses, fighting continues in Sudan's capital, Al Khartoum. Regardless of any criticism, Saudi Arabia's energy minister stated that OPEC Plus would continue to be proactive, preemptive against what may come in the future. And the EU Foreign Policy Chief stated that US green light to allow Ukrainian pilots to fly the F-16 has created a certainty to bring the fighter jets to the Ukrainian battlefield. Hello again and welcome. Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune affirmed that Algeria and Portugal share an identical view on many international files and issues. The Algerian President, in a joint press statement with his Portuguese counterpart, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, said that the two countries share an identical view on many international and regional files and issues, reiterating his country's support for the Palestinian cause.
وافقنا حول مجمل القضايا التي تطرقنا إليها، مثل دولة البرتغال. الجزائر كذلك تطمح إلى السلم بين أوكرانيا وروسيا إن شاء الله. نطمح كذلك إلى حل مشكل الصحراء الغربية حسب تعليمات الأمم المتحدة وقرارات مجلس الأمن. مثل ما تعرفون فخامة الرئيس، الجزائر موقفها واضح، أن ندافع من أجل دولتين. لازم تكون فيه دولة فلسطينية في حدود 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. فيما يخص الوضع في مالي والساحل، عبرنا على اتفاقنا تقريبا نفس النظرة. أعتقد ما فيش نقطة من النقاط اللي ناولنا فيها الحديث مع فخامة الرئيس اللي عندنا فيها نظرة مختلفة.
Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa affirmed on Tuesday in Lisbon that his country respects and support for the United Nations resolution on the issue of Western Sahara.
We have a firm position that respects the role of the United Nations and their resolutions regarding the Western Sahara issue. We want to do a democratic work that satisfies everyone, and our position is firm.
Also, the Portuguese president stressed that his country's positions are identical with Algeria in the fight of migration and the fight against terrorism.
Our role is firm in the future and important vision regarding migration, forced displacements, and the fight against terrorism and against all these scourges. We cooperate a lot with the Republic of Algeria throughout the African continent.
And on his part, Algerian President urged the municipalities of Lisbon and Algiers to step up cooperation in various aspects.
J'invite la mairie de Lisbonne de se rapprocher au maximum de la mairie d'Alger pour faire beaucoup de travail ensemble, notamment en ce qui concerne la cybernétique, en ce qui concerne la digitalisation, en ce qui concerne toute l'évolution que connaît actuellement Lisbonne, une belle ville, une ville moderne qui se modernise tout en restant historique.
In the same press statement, the Algerian president stated that talks were fruitful, frank and sincere, and reflected the depth of relations between the two countries, and the visit would open new horizons of cooperation in various fields, showing once again his keenness to adhere to the treaty of friendship, good neighborliness and cooperation.
نجدد الحرص على التزامنا بمعاهدة الصداقة وحسن الجوار والتعاون الموقعة في 8 جانفي 2005. كانت محادثات مع فخامة الرئيس مارسيلو مثمرة وصريحة وصادقة، عكست حقيقة عمق العلاقات السياسية وسمحت بتعزيز التشاور السياسي المنتظم المعبر عن الشراكة المتعددة الجوانب التي تجمع الجزائر والبرتغال في بيئة إقليمية ودولية معقدة. احنا نتمنى أنه مادام نشعر بالقرب من دولة البرتغال الصديقة، مرة أخرى أكاد أن أقول شقيقة، نتمنى أن العلاقات تقفز إلى ما أحسن نوعيا وأكثر كثافة في كل ميادين، ميدان ثقافي، ميدان تعليم، ميدان طاقة، ميدان الصناعة، ميدان حتى الرياضة.
In turn, the Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa considered that Algeria is an important country in all fields, stressing that this visit will open prospects for joint relations between the two countries.
It is a visit that will open up new perspectives and will promote bilateral cooperation relations at a higher level, particularly in the fields of diplomatic, national security, and economic cooperation that we want to further reinforce and develop. Portugal can also contribute in renewable energy. It also has an important digital platform, in addition to other sectors such as tourism, economy, and education.
It's worth mentioning that the Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune was given an official reception by his Portuguese counterpart, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, on the second day of his state visit to Portugal. The reception ceremony started from the Emperor's Square, which bears historical symbolism for Portugal, with the sound of 22 artillery rounds. The Algerian president and his Portuguese counterpart listened to the national anthems and watched a group of various Portuguese forces pay them an honorary salute. In Portugal still, the Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune also visited several landmarks in Portugal capital, Lisbon, bearing a historic symbol of Portugal. During his visit to the headquarters of the city of Lisbon, President Tebboune was handed over the city's key by its mayor, calling for a relationship of cooperation and convergence with the city of Algiers. Algeria and Portugal have multifaceted partnership based on friendship, cooperation, and good neighborliness. Agreement was as well as contracts providing for the supply by Algeria of more than 80% of Portugal's needs. More on this report.
The state visit paid by Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune to Portugal reflects the two sides' hope to seal agreements in the energy sector, trade and migration, in addition to fostering economic cooperation as part of their close historical ties.
البرتغال في المتناول تاع اقتصاد الجزائر، فيدونا ونفيدوه، نحاول نسترجع ما فاتنا، لأن وقت فات مع الأسف ما ماني نلوم حتى على حد، ولا الواقع هذا هو. الجزائر كانت فقدت اللمعان تاعها، الحمد لله الأمور رجعت وتتمتع بالاحترام تاع الجميع. احنا البرتغال احنا متفتحين، اللي يحبوها نديروها مع بعض، نشتركوا مع بعض في مشاريع، نشتركوا مع بعض في النفط، في بناء السفن، في بناء السكنات.
The Algerian community in Portugal is a vital link in the cooperation between the two friendly nations and a significant source of knowledge and expertise, qualifying it to support Algeria's economic development by taking advantage of state-sponsored facilities and incentives.
بالنسبة لكم انتوما بالنسبة اللي عايشين في الغربة نحاول باش نخفف عليكم الوطء نتاع الغربة هذه باش نسهل الرجوع نتاعكم أو بالأقل الاستثمار تاعكم في بلادكم ولو تبقوا في الغربة وديروا مؤسسات ولا شركات في بلادكم باش تفيدوا الاقتصاد نتاع بلادكم. المهم ماناش ناسينكم انتوما جزائريين وتبعدوا ولا تقربوا تبقوا جزائريين والجزائر بلادكم.
In line with the friendship and trust relations binding the two countries, Algeria and Portugal have pooled efforts to boost economic cooperation, trade and investment in all fields of endeavor.
And from Portugal to Spain, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Spanish Parliament will meet at the end of this month to decide on a list of submitted by the opposition People's Party criticizing the government of Pedro Sanchez and holding it responsible for the unprecedented losses experienced by Spanish economic institutions due to Algeria's suspension of the friendship treaty with Madrid. People's Party demanded the Spanish government pay monetary compensation to about 600 institutions affected by this separation as they suffered losses of 733 million euros between June and November 2022. Coming back to Africa, the head of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mohamed Al-Menfi, affirmed his support to human rights, civil society activists, politicians, and journalists. Al-Menfi denounced during his sharing on Monday a high-level meeting of the working group emanating from Berlin process on international humanitarian law and human rights in Tripoli, with the participation of the head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, Abdullah Batili, any attack, kidnapping, enforced disappearance or arbitrary detention against civil activists, politicians, and also journalists. A new 7-day truce officially began in Sudan. However, airstrikes and clashes have been reported, dampening hopes for the latest attempt at ceasefire in the conflict-hit country. Nabil Khazini.
The week-long ceasefire in Sudan has started, but the beginning was fragile and weapons are still held firm. Nighttime airstrikes were reported in at least one area after the ceasefire. The respite from heavy fighting aims to allow for the so much needed humanitarian assistance to be delivered.
يلزم الاتفاق الطرف الآخر. The agreement commits the parties to evacuate and to not acquire territories and to protect public facilities, in particular hospitals and power plants and water infrastructure. It also establishes a mechanism to monitor the implementation. The scope of the agreement includes all of Sudan, an end to the hostilities, an end to targeting civilian aircrafts and humanitarian aircrafts, and to end the collection of arms from foreign sources, and to end demolition and destruction of civilian infrastructure, and all acts of looting and vandalism.
The truce has increased hopes for a break from the conflict, which has displaced more than 1 million people from their homes, including approximately 250,000 who have fled to neighboring countries. How not, when life is becoming more and more harder. But for some others, even escaping is not possible. Tana is one of them. She has no means of fleeing the Sudanese conflict.
I need to earn money for my day-to-day expenses as I don't have anyone to support me, so I'm compelled to work.
Previous attempts to achieve a lasting pause in hostilities in the Northeast African country have all been shaky or collapsed.
In Africa, still children in the Horn of Africa are going through an unprecedented crisis of hunger, displacement, water shortage, and insecurity, according to the UN Children's Fund. Mariam Zian on this report.
The Horn of Africa continues to be under malnutrition's thumb. New figures by UNICEF show that 7 million children under 5 continue to suffer from malnutrition, while 1.9 million others are at risk of dying from hunger. The UN body has highlighted that children residing in East Africa need urgent aid as they confront an unparalleled crisis that includes widespread malnutrition, displacement, and water scarcity, on top of a highly unstable and insecure environment. Data from UNICEF shows that about 23 million people are on the brink of famine in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia.
The crisis in the Horn has been devastating for children. Over the past 3 years, communities have been forced to take extreme measures to survive, with millions of children and families leaving their homes out of pure desperation in search of food and water. This crisis has deprived children of the essentials of childhood, having enough to eat, a home, safe water, and going to school.
Severe drought coupled with rapidly increasing food prices exacerbated food insecurity in Africa's easternmost region. Thus, support to accelerate humanitarian assistance efforts in the Horn of Africa to avert famine and child deaths is critical.
This year, further flexible funding will not just help children recover from a crisis of this magnitude, but also go towards developing more resilient, sustainable systems for children in the region that can withstand future climate impacts and other shocks.
The UN organization called on donors to provide critical humanitarian aid, warning that severe weather conditions may cause new crises to break out.
The leaders of Indonesia and Iran on Tuesday signed a preferential trade agreement to expand economic relations during an official visit by Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi's two-day trip is aimed at strengthening economic ties between the Muslim-majority nations, and amid heightened global geopolitical tensions, several countries, including the United States, have imposed broad sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program and alleged rights violations.
Hari ini Indonesia dan Iran.
Today, Indonesia and Iran have signed a preferential trade agreement. We hope that it would increase trade between Indonesia and Iran. President Raisi and I also talked about the creation of a B2B agreement and also development investment in the Nusantara capital and solution to the oil and gas sector investment.
As a result of this visit, there will be significant steps taken in the development of bilateral relations. We have set goals for development of trade and economic ties between the two countries from the current levels to the tune of $20 billion. If we don't want to say dollars, then we can say it in terms of the same level of investment in rupiah and rial, which are the national currencies of the two countries. We intend to work with Indonesia and other nations in our national currencies.
In Asia, still former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was questioned by an anti-graft agency on corruption charges, according to his lawyer, less than a week after he rejected a summons to appear and denounce the allegation against him. The former Prime Minister's wife, Bushra Baby, was also granted protective bail until May 31 in a corruption case by the National Accountability Bureau in Islamabad, while Khan denies the charges, saying he and his wife were not involved in any wrongdoing. Saudi Arabia's Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman has said OPEC Plus would continue to be a proactive, preemptive and hedge against what may come in the future, regardless of any criticism. The Saudi minister's remarks came on the sidelines of his participation in Qatar Economic Forum in Doha, during which he describes speculators as investors who bet on oil price turmoil.
I think speculators, like anything in any market, they are there to stay. I keep advising them that they will be ouching. They did ouch in April. I don't have to show my cards. I'm not a poker player and I don't know poker, how to play poker, but I got it from a movie somewhere. But I would just tell them, watch out.
In the same line of thought, Saudi Arabia's Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman has said that he would kept short sellers outshin and told them to watch out, days before a planned OPEC Plus meeting to decide on future oil policy.
The whole world needs not to forget that we have a future, and we should be brave enough, courageous enough to attend to that future without continuing this so-called kicking the can policies, those policies that may allow us to fend the situation for this month, next month, or even the month after. But with that, we're losing sight of our intentions and our more extreme important objectives.
Moving on now to Europe. Training Ukrainian pilots on Western F-16 fighter jets does not make NATO a party to the conflict, its chief Jens Stoltenberg said on Sunday, as allies pledged to speed up preparations to start lessons. On Monday, senior Russian diplomats said that transfer of the F-16 jets to Ukraine would raise the question of NATO's role in the conflict.
And we have to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. Ukraine has the right of self-defense. They are defending themselves. And the right of self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter. We help Ukraine to uphold that right. That's our right, to help them protect UN law, international law, against the war of aggression. That doesn't make NATO and NATO allies party to the conflict, but we are supporting Ukraine to defend themselves against a war of aggression, a brutal invasion by President Putin.
European Union Foreign Policy official Josep Borrell announced that training for Ukrainian pilots on the F-16 fighters has begun in multiple countries. Meanwhile, the Kremlin views this move by the West as an extension of their involvement rather than a game changer on the ground. Hussein Barkan.
In the midst of ongoing war in Ukraine, a rare scene unfolds in Donetsk as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits units of the Ukrainian Marine Corps.
It is evident that this escalation continues with the provision of increasingly advanced weaponry. While the decision has been made to introduce aircraft like other weapons, it will not fundamentally change the situation on the front. This is an ongoing pattern where Western countries are increasingly embroiled in this conflict.
Zelensky's vision of a future and an independent Ukraine garnered significant attention during the meeting of European Union defense ministers in Brussels. They emphasized the need to intensify support for Ukraine, including the trainings of its pilots on American F-16 fighters.
I'm happy that finally the training of the pilots for the F-16 has started in several countries. It will take time, but the sooner the better.
Although the introduction of American F-16 fighters into the conflict marks a significant turning point, Moscow remains unfazed, believing that Western involvement will not alter the situation on the ground, but rather deepen the involvement of Brussels and Washington in the conflict.
It is evident that this escalation continues with the provision of increasingly advanced weaponry. While the decision has been made to introduce aircraft like other weapons, it will not fundamentally change the situation on the front. This is an ongoing pattern where Western countries are increasingly embroiled in this conflict.
The Kremlin's perspective on Western involvement, coupled with Russian determination to complete their military operation in Ukraine, and Kyiv's commitment to reclaim the territories controlled by Russian forces since February 24 of the previous year, present challenges for resolving the Ukrainian war and opens up various scenarios for its future.
In a related matter, in a state award ceremony in the Kremlin, the Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke about the conflict in Ukraine and stated that his country's aim was to protect the rights of its people in the context of what he termed were historic injustices. Mr. Putin confirmed that war is being waged against his country, explaining that Russia was trying to stop it through the special military operation in Ukraine. Closing our news bulletin with sport, 3 persons have been arrested in connection with the racial comments directed at Real Madrid's Brazilian striker Vinicius Jr. during the last game against Valencia on Sunday, while 4 others have been held in the capital, also in connection with an effigy of the player that was hanging from a bridge in Madrid 4 months ago. The abuse directed at Vinicius Jr. has reignited the issue of racism in the Spanish football and in the wider Spanish society, with the player himself declaring that Spain is now known as a nation of a country of racists. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for being with us in this late hour. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform. And all I can say, at the end, take care of yourself. Good night.